Well, welcome back to the Point of Order podcast, an inside look at California politics in the state legislature. I am your host, Assemblyman Josh Hoover, for our first ever remote podcast, actually. But we set this up because we have a very special guest on today, the Honorable, I should say, and former Assembly member Mike Gatto from Los Angeles. Mike, how's it going? Thanks for coming on.
It's great to be here, Josh.
No, I really appreciate this. I know you and I have had some great conversations in the past, and I truly admire, the work you did in the legislature. So really excited to chat with you today. Thought you might be able to share some cool insights with the listeners on your experience in the legislature and maybe some fun stories as well. So
that sounds great. It's so nice to be
here. If we could get started, though, why don't we, before we jump into it, it's probably not best for me to give your bio. So why don't you just tell listeners a little bit more about yourself, sort of your background, and what you're doing these days?
Sure. So I am two of the most popular professions in the world, right? I'm a lawyer and a politician. It does not get any more popular than that. I think if I started selling used cars, I would have the trifecta, right? I would be like just everything that everybody really hates. But no, I was lucky enough to serve in the legislature. As you know, it's a tremendous honor. My background was that I had worked a little bit in politics, but also a lot in the private sector. I had taught at schools. I had worked as a lawyer helping small businesses. And then at some point, I decided to run for office. I got tired of shaking my fist at the newspaper in the morning, and I decided to challenge myself and run. I was not considered a favorite. You know a little bit about prevailing as an underdog, too.
Yeah.
And I was by no means considered a favorite. There's one lobbyist in Sacramento who tells stories about how when he would walk into the typical Sacramento Capitol watering holes and say, "Oh, I think that Mike Gatto guy has a chance to win," they would shout him down, right? And I think my first race, I got 3 checks from the powers. Everything else came from humans, which was nice. But anyway, make a long story short, I served 7 years in the California State Legislature. My district, very easy to remember, it was centered in Hollywood. That's the easiest thing. I represented Glendale, Burbank, and the Los Angeles neighborhoods of Hollywood, Silver Lake, Los Feliz. And it was a tremendous honor. And, I like to think I'll be back at some point in some form of public service.
Yeah, that'd be great. So, like, what kind of prompted you to run? I mean, and what was sort of the context of how you won, right? Because like if it was an upset, I to your point, I also defeated an incumbent, which obviously doesn't happen too much in California, which was pretty crazy. And I actually think it gave me a little bit different perspective on the job because, I grew up in the community I now represent, and it truly is just an honor to be here, right? I just feel really lucky every day to get to be a voice for my constituents. But what sort of prompted, you jumping into this crazy world of politics?
Great question. So, I was very upset at the way that the state was being run. You know how it is. I mean, we'll often encounter a colleague who, they're, for lack of a better word, they're like a one-issue type of person, and I respect that completely. Yeah. Sometimes, we'll have a colleague who, you say, "What's your story? Why did you run?" And they'll say, "Well, I was a classroom teacher for 40 years, and I saw what was wrong with the education system, and I'm here to work on K through 12 education." It's like that narrow. For me, it was like, I was upset at the way the state was run, like from like the structural, like financial, like tax, like all the like overarching things that make it possible to spend on roads and spend on education and pave the freeways. All these things I thought were being mismanaged. And so, I started, giving some speeches about it and talking. And at some point, someone said to me, "Well, if you think you know better, why don't you run yourself, right?" And
famous last words.
Yeah, and I had a very good job, right? I was an attorney at one of the downtown Los Angeles law firms. I was making way more than we make in the legislature. My commute did not involve a Southwest jet. It was a very good life I had. But I took to heart what that person said. If you think you can do better, then why don't you try? So I jumped in the race, and it was a whirlwind of activity. But when all was said and done, I got there, and I was so happy to have.
Well, I want to dive into a few things like that you worked on in the legislature, but first, let's start with something a little more lighthearted. What do you like to do for fun in your spare time in Los Angeles? I lived in LA for 2 years. By the way, I'm a NorCal guy, but amazing city. Just absolutely love
Thank
Los
you.
Angeles. I don't love the Dodgers, but I do love Los Angeles.
Well, that's
So,
very kind of you. That's very kind of you.
but
So,
yeah, what do you like to do for fun?
so for fun, I have a variety of interests. Number one, obviously, is spending time with my children, whatever they want to do. My daughters, used to make me shop on Shein a lot with them. That, of course, has been diminished because of tariffs and things like that, or just, I guess,
Yeah,
lack of interest in things like that, which are, not the. I sort of tried to inform them in a very non-boring way what this means in terms of sweatshops and stuff like that. So, I think that has been that has changed a little bit. For my son, it's whatever outdoors, football, baseball,
it's
frisbee,
awesome.
hiking, everything like that.
Is he into spike ball at all? Because my
He's
son's
not.
gotten really into spike ball
How old is your
lately.
son?
He's 16. My oldest is
Yeah,
16. I
okay.
got
So
two, but yeah.
my boy is just 8. So
Okay. So he's still got time.
he does have time. But if it's me personally, I mean, look, I love history. I have a history podcast on the side, which
That's cool.
some people roll their eyes, but I do love history, and I like reading a lot, and I just like doing anything physical. I mean, I'll go hiking, go to the beach, whatever. I like swimming in the ocean without a wetsuit, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, no, love it. And you guys are in a great place to do all that. That was one thing I loved about LA is you're so close to the ocean. It's awesome.
for sure.
What's your podcast if you want to tell listeners where they can find your history podcast?
So the podcast is called WTF History, and we go over the more. I do it with David Quintana, who's a lobbyist up in
Oh,
Sacramento.
nice. Okay.
And believe it or not, we are now breaking 200,000 views per episode.
That's so
We,
cool.
we every episode we do about 10 or 15 minutes on an occurrence in history that makes you go, God, like for example, we did an episode on how very, very few people know this. In the Great Depression, there was an uprising by World War I veterans who wanted to get their pay earlier because they were very poor, they were destitute. And the U.S. government tried to get the Army and the Marines to go against veterans.
Wow.
And the Army refused. The Marines agreed. It was surreal, right? And this is one of the most surreal episodes in American history. And so we cover things like that. We cover like parts of history that make you go, oh my gosh, I never knew about that. And
That is so cool, and definitely one that I'll need to check out, and hopefully some of the history buffs in our audience would love to check it out too. WTF History, that's
WTF
awesome.
history, yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, maybe we'll have to have you back on and talk about history sometime.
That would be great.
Some of your favorite stories from history. So, I guess just diving more into some of our other questions, I think it's funny. We hear from listeners a lot. Obviously, we've had some Republican legislators on this podcast, not surprisingly, but a few Democrats as well. And we always get notes from listeners like, you got to have another Democrat on your podcast. And and Mike, obviously, someone that's on the other side of the aisle from me, but someone that I truly appreciate your perspective. And so how do you feel how was your time in the legislature on that sort of partisan back and forth, just in terms of not the fights you guys had, but how were your relationships with Republicans? How did you feel like things were at when you were in the legislature? And do you think some of that has changed?
Yeah, so I mean, my time in the legislature overlapped with the ascent of Trump for a couple of years, but obviously the partisanship right now in our country, I think everybody would agree, is pretty severe. People, they feel like they can do anything. I think certain elected officials of both sides feel like they can get away with more just based on their critique of the other party. What I mean by that is, as a Democrat, what I notice is that Democratic voters will tolerate complete incompetence from a Democratic elected official so long as that Democratic elected official attacks Trump. And it's heartbreaking, right? Because when I tell people that partisanship, it doesn't just result in making your family gatherings nasty, and it doesn't just result in people losing friendships. it actually results in worse government. They say, what do you mean? I say, well, there are members of both parties who are completely incompetent. But if they put up a funny tweet about Joe Biden or a funny tweet about Donald Trump, people will be like, oh, wow, he or she's really fighting for us. Go, and that's just stupid. I wish the public would see through that a little more. And it starts at home, right? I wish my party would see through it a little more. When I was in the legislature, I thought that whenever somebody was raising partisanship, it was usually because they had something to hide from a policy perspective. If I would go into caucus and they would say, oh, the Republicans are going to really stick it to us on this bill, I was thinking, well, wait a minute, we have a majority, a super majority in the state. So what do you mean they're gonna stick it to us? They're gonna say something? I mean, why are you trying to appeal to, there's something that is very much, pick your favorite book, whether it's Animal Farm or Brave New World or whatever, where when it's when somebody feels like they need to rally the troops based on another, everything would be great if it wasn't just for this group or that. You always got to get your antenna up when that happens. And so I would always be a little bit wary when people tried to use partisanship too much.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a lot of that on both sides of the aisle right now. I actually was on your website and you had written a piece about Citizens United, but it was interesting because one of the interesting things at the time of the Citizens United decision is we were all super worried about corporate dollars in politics. That was sort of the conversation at the time around Citizens United. But now I actually worry about other things. Not that that's, we obviously don't want, money can obviously corrupt politics in different ways on a lot of different sides. But the growth in the reliance on the small dollar donation, something that we really thought was going to be more empowering for people. The challenge with it is it's really created a lot of echo chambers where, the groups of people that are giving tend to be like the 10% on each fringe, right? So the very far left or the very far right. And in order to cater and get those donations, you really have to play to those extremes. And I think it's really changed our politics in a way that has probably not for the better, in my opinion, in terms of sort of continuing to have to feed this beast of partisanship, right? Yeah, and I think it's led to a lot of the hyper-partisanship that we're starting to see right now. And there's a lot of other factors as well. But I found it really interesting in sort of some of the politicians I've watched that take that approach on the right and the left.
That's a very good point. And if I'm hearing you correctly, I had never thought about this before, but I think it's accurate. You're saying that to essentially get those $5 and $10 contributions from around the country, you have to be really loud in your face. You have to stick out with those emails and all those statements. That's a very good point. I mean, I just keep coming back to money in politics is always going to be awkward. There's no right way. I personally just believe in disclose as fast as possible. Yep. We did an episode on our history podcast on how the Roman Republic, before the empire, they had a republic, and the republic was actually what the founding fathers based the United States on, right? It had a Senate, it had something akin to a House, it had a Supreme Court, and it had two presidents, almost like our president and vice president. But anyway, the way that the Romans voted was they tried to cut out the middleman for campaign contributions, and it was really fascinating. Every 4 years, you would be assessed, and it was honor system. It was like the IRS, but honor system. You would go in, and you would report your net worth, not your income, but your net worth. Now, why did they know that the honor system would be honored? Because you got as many votes equivalent with your net worth, right? And so and they would vote in order, right? And they would say, anybody worth more than $1 billion is like this group, and they cast their billion votes for it, right? And then it would go down to the people worth 500 million, and so on and so forth. The fascinating thing is, I know this sounds crazy, but most elections were actually decided by the people, because it would be like, Elon Musk, who do you vote for? And he'd be like, I cast my 1 billion votes for Donald Trump. And they'd say, George Soros, who do you vote for? I cast my 1 billion votes for Joe Biden. And then it would go down to the next level, and so on and so forth. And but it was a really, as horrifically undemocratic as it was very honest, right? Because right now, if you're a billionaire oligarch, you just spend $1 billion on election.
$1 billion.
You buy a newspaper. You buy, and so anyway, it was a fascinating episode, and I learned a lot.
That is cool. That's actually really cool. And really fascinating because, yeah, I don't know. I've just, we'll see what kind of comes of this. But I think, I guess my point is like, you just don't really see a lot of like, let's say more moderate or, reasonable politicians on either side. You don't see them sending out these fundraising emails and say, we need, common sense,
Right.
send me $5.
Yeah,
It just doesn't work as well, right?
I'm gonna strap on my backpack and kill the other side. Give me $5.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
So, I do hope we can get beyond that. And I think things, I think that's why I really appreciate you coming on, because I do think a lot of it is we have to keep having conversations with each other, and we have to keep those conversations going. And I personally, my experience so far in the legislature has been that I get along great with the vast majority of my Democratic colleagues. We obviously don't agree on all the policy, but we're able to leave that on the field, and we're able to have, some good friendships outside of that. And so I wish, it's fascinating if you look, actually, I don't know if you guys have ever talked about this on the podcast, but if you look at like rates of partisanship in marriages, like 30 years ago versus now, it used to be like, would you marry a Democrat if you're a Republican, or vice versa, right? And most people would not really care. And then today it's like Democrats largely will not marry Republicans, and then to a slightly, I think, lesser degree, but also very high, like Republicans won't marry Democrats.
That is so sad.
And it's really sad. It's really sad.
And I was talking with a psychologist about this the other day, and he was actually saying that is like a rise in, I forget the term, but some really deeply troubling thinking, right? And and I know there's a lot of people out there who are watching who are like, they're all evil. But but still, please don't think like that. They're human beings. Talk with them.
Yeah.
Your friends, your relatives. Everyone has a reason for their viewpoint. You can't say half the country is crazy. You can't say half the country is evil,
Right.
because I have a newsflash for you, they're not.
Yeah, no, 100%. I definitely agree with that. And and it's interesting too, because we're at a really, I think, critical moment in history where we obviously have gone through periods in our history of political violence. I really do not want to see this be the latest, right? And so I think we gotta cut it off before anything else really bad happens.
Amen to that.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, I don't know, like maybe just a couple of things you worked on during your time in the legislature. I know one thing that you highlight is you did a lot of like budget work and things like that, transparency, good government stuff. What were some of your, 2 or 3 biggest accomplishments and things you really feel like I left the legislature and I'm really proud of that?
Yeah, so the first bill the first major effort I worked on was the Rainy Day Fund for California. And it's hard for people to imagine how controversial it was at the time. For people who are unfamiliar with the Rainy Day Fund, right, it's a basic principle that every household follows, which is when times are good, we put a little bit of money away for when times are bad. Believe it or not, the state of California, people will believe this, the state of California did not have any such principle in place. When times were good, we spent like drunken sailors, and then we would always scramble during a recession. The Rainy Day Fund was so controversial when I introduced it that of the 50 Democrats in the Assembly, not one would sign on the bill.
Wow.
Not one. I was the only one who would put it forward. There were newspaper editorializing on how shocked they were that I would author this bill. And the irony is when I talked with my friends in labor, I would say, trust me, this will stabilize spending. It's really not good for anybody. It's not good for anybody to be like, oh my God, we got all this money. And then like when times are bad, it's like, oh my God, we got to fire everybody, right? And
we got to furlough.
I tried to explain that, right? And now it's really funny when there's any attack on the Rainy Day Fund, it's my friends in labor who are like, no, don't touch it. It's really good, right? And so it was really funny. And it was just really, really but it was a big battle. Finally, I think Jerry Brown, who was governor at the time, got behind it as well. There have been, now 4 or 5 different versions that have passed. But to me, that was probably my single biggest accomplishment. And it's something that nobody out there cares about. what people come up to me about, it was really funny, members of the public, is, so I introduced the legislation to bring back the black classic license plate that was like, popular in like the late 60s,
so
right?
cool. Yeah.
And it's the best-selling license plate in world history. And that is what people talk to me about. Never mind like saving the state budget, like it's the black license plate that people talk about. So that's just one example of how,
that's funny.
Life of the legislature, right? I mean, the boring stuff is what needs to happen, but it's the exciting, it's the other stuff. Yeah, it's like, classic cars, right? That people want to talk about. So
classic cars are popular. Jay Leno was here this year talking about his bill on classic car exemptions for some of the CARB regulations or whatever.
Which got killed, right? It got killed.
It did get killed at the very end, which is kind of a bummer, but I thought it was a cool bill, but it's a big deal. Like I'm not a classic car guy, but people love them, right?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I see a lot of those do you have a black and yellow plate? I think that's the question.
I don't. I have a retired lawmaker plate. And when I left the legislature,
you probably can't get it in that, huh?
Yeah, they said, well, you didn't write the bill to include like the 50 people in the state who have legislated. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know you needed that, but it was pretty.
That's
funny.
hilarious. Yeah, it is funny how that works. I had a weird experience that I'll share with you, or I'll take the liberty to share. I was actually at a Giants game, so don't hold that against me. But my wife and I went to, so one of the big bills that I worked on in my first term was the Phone Free Schools Act. And so we actually, the governor came on board, actually helped champion it with me. My name stayed on the bill somehow. It was pretty incredible, partly because we got a lot of Democrats on board as joint authors.
Let me pause and explain to the audience, because some might not understand. By Josh saying his name stayed on the bill, what he means is there's a horrible practice that I hate. No, seriously, I hate it.
Yeah.
When a Republican comes up with a good idea, and phone-free schools is a great idea, Democrats in the legislature, let's be honest, have a practice of taking the Republican's name off the bill. I think that's horrible because, well, for two reasons. Number one, it's not fair. It's this person's idea. Number two, you want Republicans to have skin in the game. You want the minority party in any state to feel like they have a role in government, right? You represent as many people as I did, right? So
absolutely.
So anyway, I'm sorry, but so
you're right. No, I think it's a great point, and you don't want people to check out, right? And you don't really want your opposition party, which I think every system needs an opposition party to hold the other side accountable. You don't want them to be always burning everything down, right?
Correct.
I think you want to be able to have some things you can work together on. I was really appreciative, Assemblymember Al Marasucci, Assemblymember Josh Lowenthal, number of really, Democrats that have worked on education issues signed on with me. I think that helped us keep the bill moving, keep my name on it. And ultimately, the governor, I have to give him a lot of props because he, came around and championed the bill as well. So it was a great, how often do we get a bipartisan effort like that, on something meaningful? True. I think it was really cool. But, it is, I was at this baseball game with my wife, and it's like the third inning, and we're watching the game, and these two guys we don't know behind us just start talking like, hey, did you hear that they're not letting kids use phones in schools anymore? And like they just start having this debate about like my bill at the Giants game. And my wife is just like, looks over at me. She's like, if they only knew, like you're like sitting right here.
Isn't
and it's
wild?
It's the weirdest thing, right? Because I came into this job obviously to do good things like that. And, but it's just very surreal, right? When you actually get one of your big priorities done and you see the impact that it has. And you see, for your example, like the rainy day fund has had a huge impact on the budget process, right? And our ability to sort of weather some of these financial storms. Yeah. So,
and it's really funny. An anecdote on that is for folks watching is, as state lawmakers, we're often completely anonymous. There's some parts of our district where, they really know us well and, you can't cross the street without somebody talking to you. But in the Capitol, in Sacramento and downtown, it is like just the opposite.
Yeah.
And sometimes within the greater Sacramento community, there was a weekend where we had stayed up in Sacramento, and I had taken my wife to get her hair done. We were new up in Sacramento. She didn't have a salon up there, and we were driving around in some really obscure neighborhood of Sacramento that we had never knew about. She was inside getting her hair done, and I had our baby daughter, and I was putting her to sleep and like rocking her. And I was walking in this random residential neighborhood where it was quiet and peaceful. There's no cars, and I finally got my daughter to sleep. And some lobbyist sees me, just like, Assemblyman Gatto, like, can I talk to you about that? I was like, oh, like, quiet, got the baby, like, and it's just so funny. But yeah, but folks at a Giants game are like, yeah, they'll have a conversation about your bill right in front of you.
It's so crazy. Yeah, no, it's crazy. It actually is tough being in Sacramento. I get why people like to get out of town and not be here, because, you know, someone's always asking you for everything. I actually got a chance to, the governor hosted an event for the legislature at the end of session, and I got just a couple minutes with him to thank him for signing the bill, the phone bill. But it's just funny to watch people just engage with the governor, and what a weird life that would be too. Like him or dislike him, like putting all that aside, like everyone always wanted something from him. Like every conversation was like, hey, can you sign this, or can you like do this, or like, I just wanted to thank him real quick because I don't have a lot of asks on his desk. But it's like, it's just really interesting when someone's always just asking for something, you know?
For sure. That is something I noted too.
You know, I really think the work you did on the rainy day fund is critical, even though it might not be quote unquote, you know, sexy for policy or, you know, something that people are going to talk to you about all the time. I think is critically important for our budget process. And I actually think Jerry Brown was probably the governor to do that, right? I mean, I'm not sure that happens today in quite the same way that it maybe the moment was right when you did that, because Jerry Brown always seemed like at least he cared about fiscal responsibility to a certain degree.
Yes and no. So I appreciated a lot that Jerry Brown did, but I will also be very critical of him for certain things. And I'll tell you why I am a little bit critical on him. Jerry Brown, someone with a surname Brown has never lost a Democratic primary in the state of California's history. And what I mean is Jerry, his father, and his sister. They basically have electoral dominance in the Democratic Party in California, and they've never lost the primary. They've lost some general elections, but the point is, in modern California, Jerry Brown was never going to lose re-election. Number two, he was never going to run for president, despite maybe in the back of his head he still wanted to. When he came back for his second run as governor, he was not going to run for president, so he didn't have to worry about pissing people off or making bad decisions. Number three, he never had an issue raising money. He always had tons of political cash. And what I'm saying by starting with those three things is that he never had to worry about his political future. He never had to say, if I make a controversial decision, I might not win re-election, okay? Which is usually why, as we know, politicians are not courageous. Did he reform CEQA? No.
No, he did not, but he did call it the Lord's work.
Right, yeah. When other of us tried to do it, right? Oh, you're doing the Lord's work over there. Did he reform our tax code? No, he did not. He just did the same Band-Aids. I'm going to raise tax on the rich. Is like, you know, this BS that he did.
The temperary taxes.
The temporary taxes on the riches or middle class, right? Like, and it's like, well, wait a second. And by the way, the fourth thing I'll add is that the media just, you know, Jerry Brown would say something. Jerry Brown would be like, ipsum sanctum Latin, blah, blah, and the media would be like, oh, he's so smart. I just love this, right? Like, and in many cases, it would be a malapropism. If you actually know Latin, it'd be like, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Like, but anyway.
That's great.
So he had the media, tons of campaign cash, never lost an election, no future ambition. And yet the two biggest issues, you could argue two of the biggest issues in California, he did not do anything on in 8 years. I don't give him as high grades as other people. I think for those reasons, I give him a little bit of a lower grade.
And I think maybe we remember him a little better too, just because, you know, I think
Nostalgia.
people over time, you start to forget, some of the realities of it. I also think just like I tend to compare him to the current situation. And, you know, I think when you do have a governor, let's just say, I won't name names, but everyone knows who I'm talking about, who is like running for president, right? For example, I mean, in theory,
right? In theory,
but we all kind of know what he's doing, what he's angling towards, and really someone who I think purely is a political machine. It does sort of make me look at Jerry and go, at least he sort of cared about the policy, right? I don't see that as much. I see and I talked to my Democratic colleagues about this too with the current governor. I see so little engagement with the legislature. You know, so much of the legislative engagement happens in the last month of session, and it's like, this isn't how you really push good policy, right? That being said, I think we've seen more CEQA reform, than we saw under Jerry Brown, right? And we've seen, and a lot of that, by the way, has been pushed by the legislature, right? Not necessarily,
Precisely.
The executive. So it's been interesting.
Yeah.
So now that we're still on the topic of sort of the building and the legislature, if you're willing to, what are some of the most interesting stories that you might have from your time? They can be whatever you want them to be, but any fun stories that you remember from your days under the dome?
So I have two stories that I will share. One I don't think I've ever shared before. The second the second one I did share, and when I did, it was like really big news, but I think it's worth retelling. So the first story I'll share, just to give people a little bit of sense of like how sometimes lobbyists or the procedure or the process can speak out of both sides of its mouth. So I was chair of the Appropriations Committee during my second and third term, and the Appropriations Committee, for people not watching, it basically engages in a cost-benefit analysis to determine if a policy is worth the cost in the state of California. And as you can imagine, it's very busy. It handles, we would handle 150 bills per meeting. We had one hearing where, just by sheer chance, the bills that got called, right? It was like, okay, AB 123 is up, right? And then come to the microphone, who wants to speak on it? And it was one of those sort of nanny state bills that had to do with, I want to say it was whether you could buy certain foods with CalFresh, or maybe it was whether you could buy certain foods, period, or if they needed to have a warning label, okay? And a lobbyist, I'll never forget this, she gets up and she says, oh my God, like, we gotta do this bill, we gotta like make sure people can't buy Fritos or something, whatever it was, or like sodas are labeled, whatever it was, because there's an obesity crisis among the poor in the state, and those on CalFresh are obese, and they're all obese, and they're all just whatever. It's like, okay, right? And then it was like, okay, next, AB 745 is up. And then it was a bill to increase CalFresh benefits, and the same lobbyist gets up and she says, people on CalFresh are starving. Nobody has nobody has enough food. They're not getting enough calories. We need to, and I was like, now I understand that the two could be true, right? You could argue that people are getting too much junk food and therefore,
and not the right calories.
Yeah, and I totally get that. But the way she presented it was basically, they're all obese, they're all starving. And it was like, are you not paying attention? Because I will never forget that. It was the same lobbyist who just happened to be,
This is the beauty of having multiple clients, right?
It's yeah. And I was just like blown away at that. And so, the public is like, yeah, well, politicians speak out of both sides of their mouth. Yeah, so do lobbyists.
So do lobbyists,
so do lobbyists. The second story that I've told a couple times now, which I had been aching to tell for a long time, was that people know, people don't know, that in Sacramento, we actually have a pretty good tradition of being very careful about breaking the law. And that's because there have been some very, very high profile arrests in Sacramento, probably more so than in the federal level and at the local level. When I came up through politics, I was used to going to federal events where, somebody running for Congress would be like, and I'm going to defend this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to increase funding for solar. And when I came to Sacramento, I remember asking my fundraiser, okay, so when do I give my speech at the fundraiser? And he's like, speech? You can't give a speech, that's illegal. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you can't talk about what you're gonna work on at a fundraiser like that. We keep them separate here. And I was fascinated, right? Because, we still encounter federal candidates who are like, I'm gonna do this and do that, like give me money, right?
Yeah.
People don't do that in Sacramento. So but anyway, the story that I want to tell is that when I was chair of appropriations, there was a bill that I really supported. And it was a bill that had to do with testing cosmetic products, shampoos and stuff like that on the ears of beagles. And I know this sounds really random, but beagles have very soft hair on their ears. And for the longest time, they were used in laboratories to test, shampoos and things like that. And the bill basically would have prohibited it, right? And I was for that. And the bill was authored, I forget who the author was, but at any rate, the proponents, some of the animal rights activists, had hired this random obscure lobbyist who I think had a drinking problem. It was not a major lobbyist. I don't know if he's still active, but he sent an email to me and copied my staff like the night before it was supposed to be considered or something like that. And he's like, And, I could kind of picture him drunk texting or whatever, but he's like, oh, Assemblyman Gatto, what's it going to take to get this bill out? Like, do you need me to do a fundraiser across the street? Do you need me to give you money? Like, what's it going to take to get this bill out? Now, you're saying, wow, because this is like, despite what's in the movies, you do not talk like this. People see this in the movies all the time, but that is a big no-no. Like if you don't want to be arrested, right? And if you're scrupulous, right? And so my staff freaked out. I freaked out. We called Legislative Council. We called the FPPC. I don't think we called the FBI, but I think we called like a third group.
Maybe ethics.
Ethics. And we were like, what do we do? What do we do?
Yeah.
And they said, well, you have to kill the bill. I said, what are you talking about? They said, the offer to bribe is consideration, even if you don't accept a bribe. So to be totally certain, you have to kill the bill.
Wow.
And I was like, what? I gotta kill the bill on Beagle testing? Like, what? And they're like, and by the way, don't talk about it. Don't tell the author why.
Right.
It's an active investigation. Don't tell so I had to go in and I had to basically kill this bill on Beagle testing. And the proponents were really upset at me and I couldn't tell them why. The author was furious with me and I couldn't tell him why. And then it was like, it was just so.
That's so incredible to me. First of all, that anyone would do that. I mean, that's just. Not only is it unethical, it's just really poor form. I mean,
Correct.
really poor form and obviously illegal. I mean, I have to ask you: did the bill ever come back? Did it ever get done, or is that something the legislature still needs to do?
I don't remember if it came back the next year. I'm assuming it did. But what I can say that other people, have reacted with, it's like, oh, so if I want to kill a bill, I just have to send an email like this. I'm like, well, yeah, it's a felony. But I mean,
any third house listening right now, close your ears. But also, you don't want to go to jail,
right? But if you think about it, though, like that was the same issue that came up during the shrimp scam scandal. Was
totally
because I think the FBI in that circumstance went in and said, you've got to kill this bill, and it was like, what power that is to a law enforcement agency where they just come to the legislature. They're like, hey, trust us. This is an investigation. Kill this bill. Like that was even then. People were like, you can't tell the legislature to do that. But they do occasionally.
Well, and for people that, don't really fully understand, we've talked about it on this podcast quite a bit, the appropriations process. I mean, the chair of the appropriations committee has probably some of the most power of anyone in Sacramento,
veto authority, basically.
Right. Yeah. Just basically veto authority for any piece of legislation and every piece of legislation that has a fiscal impact, right? So, being put in that position with that, or being put, in that position with the chair position is just, it's a huge deal. And I remember I was, I'm going to like date myself in the wrong way, but I was like an intern in the Capitol, I think. I think the first year there was like the shrimp scandal, or I'm sorry, there was the Leland Yee scandal. Yes, there was like three things all in the same year.
That was the Shrimp Boy scandal.
That was Shrimp Boy, not Shrimp. Yeah, exactly.
We've had two shrimp arrests, folks. Two felony shrimp
scandals.
Jeez. Oh my God.
But there was like, the Shrimp Boy thing. There was the, a couple other, there was like three big FBI stories that year. And it's my first year in the Capitol. And I thought, this place is awful, right? Like this is just, I mean, this place is so corrupt, right? Like now we haven't really seen quite nearly that sort of activity since, but I think just, in fact, you guys, if you haven't already, should do a history podcast on that one. Because
that actually is a very good idea.
All that stuff is just so fascinating to look at sort of the scandals through California history and just so many crazy things that it's like people taking envelopes of cash and just doing, being anti-gun, but then running guns. I mean, it's just so much of it is just unbelievable that it's even possible, right? And sure. and I'm actually glad things have sort of, at least lately, seem to have calmed down on that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, always appreciate the stories because hopefully I'll have some interesting ones.
I'm sure you do.
When I leave the Capitol as well. They're a little easier to tell after you leave, though. So
that is true.
So we've kind of touched on, a lot of different things. I think, and I want to be respectful of your time. What do you sort of see as, over the next 5 to 10 years in California? We obviously have a lot of different policies and things going on right now, but what do you see as sort of some of the big policy challenges and maybe the big policy opportunities for California over the next 5 to 10 years? I understand, you were in the majority party, but I think it's pretty fair to say, and you've been willing to be critical here and there as well, that we have a lot of problems that I think need to be addressed, right? And I know sometimes there's disagreement on how to address those problems, but at the end of the day, we still have a huge homelessness crisis in our state. We have the cost of living issue across the board, whether it's gas or food or housing. We obviously have I think an energy grid issue with, we have a big push to electrify, but at the same time, just don't appear to be ready to do that long term. So what are some of the things that you're seeing and sort of hoping for over the next few years?
Yeah, so what I'm hoping for, but also what I'm seeing is a real risk of what I call a regional recession that possibly predates a national recession. What I mean by that is, you look at the effect of tariffs on our ports, and the ports are in, Oakland, Long Beach, Los Angeles, so on and so forth. You look at the fact that Hollywood has been struggling for a long time, another California industry. You look at the fact that Silicon Valley has largely been propped up by some very irrational exuberance with respect to AI, but at some point that bubble is likely to deflate, and you hope it's a soft landing. And then you just look at the other thing, which is the Big Beautiful Bill, for example. And I do a lot of work in this realm, so I'm pretty familiar with it. The Big Beautiful Bill reduced or made it much more difficult to spend money on clean energy projects, solar, wind, things like that, which is also another California-specific industry. And so if you're keeping track, that's like 4 hits. And obviously there's no love lost between the federal government and the state government right now. And then so there's reductions in funding, everything from research grants to universities to whatever, right? So that's 5 hits. One could imagine a scenario where, in a couple of years, California enters a recession before the country does. And it would be severe, right? It would be less AI spending, less Hollywood spending, housing prices crashing. They're very overheated. Reduction in federal spending, federal dollars coming into the state, reduction in clean energy spending, and reduction in port activity. Those things could, and I'm hoping they don't, but they could combine to make things really bad for California. And I'm hoping we can avoid that. What I see as the big issues are what you talked about. I see what I call the possible decline of our cities, right? San Francisco is not the city it was 20 years ago. Los Angeles is not the city it was 20 years ago. Sacramento is not the city it was 20 years ago. We have cities that are increasingly they never got the job done on homelessness. They're increasingly not getting the job done on basic city services, paving roads, filling potholes. Yeah. And then on top of that, they're extremely expensive. And so people are voting with their feet. Young people are saying, wait a minute, I'm not going to slave away at a job and drive on a really crappy street as I pass, homeless people that are not being taken care of. Yeah. And never afford a house in Los Angeles. I'm going to move elsewhere. And we're seeing that. And that has real effects for California when it comes to political power, folks. If you don't want to do it because it's the right thing to do to improve our cities, I would hope that some of our elected officials will realize we're going to lose congressional districts, we're going to lose we're going to lose electoral college seats. Right. These things will affect California. And so I see those as, big challenges and also big opportunities. If the right leader comes along, we could solve these.
Yeah, no, definitely solvable. And I think that sometimes can be frustrating, right? Being in the legislature and just like sometimes we know that they're solvable, but it's more about the political will to do that. Precisely. I think too, it's really interesting. You mentioned downtowns and big cities. I think the sort of emergence, and I don't actually view it as a bad thing, of remote work though, as well, has really is really going to force cities to reevaluate some things because. If for example, my dad lived in the Sacramento region. That's where I grew up for most of my life, at least. I'm originally from the Central Valley. My dad worked for Apple, would commute to Cupertino 2 to 3 times per week from Sacramento, right? Wow. really brutal commute, obviously, and would usually stay a couple nights in Cupertino each week. Today, yeah, that was his choice because he wanted, again, to your point, to live somewhere more affordable.
Sure.
Today, though, you can do that without the commute practically. I mean, you can get a job at a big company. You can work remotely, maybe go to the office once a month, if you need to make that commute once a month or something, and, largely have the flexibility to live wherever you want. And so I do think you're right. I mean, I think we need to change how we view the urban core, sort of the downtown. Like it's not just a work center anymore. It's also needs to be sort of a housing center and things like that. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on how do we do that? Like how do we revitalize some of these big cities? Sacramento, obviously a government town, but even government employees now working remotely in a lot of cases. So, what do you think is the solution there?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing, right, is and I mean, obviously, I'm simplifying for time purposes.
Totally, yeah.
But I believe that the key to improving homelessness is to stop treating homelessness as an economic problem. I believe that we need to treat it as a mental health problem. We need to treat it as in some cases, a substance abuse problem, and we need to treat it as appropriately. It is very rare that if somebody just lost their job and just couldn't pay the rent, that they would become the type of acute homeless person that we see on our streets. Yeah. And I think there's a lack of realism for dealing with that. I also think that the key for our housing bills is to stop coming forward with these cute and super controversial ones that everybody hates, like we're going to take a farming community and make sure that they allow ADUs. Like, why? Like, what's the point? Yeah. Like, people who move there, they move there because they don't want that, right? And we need to just realize that in places where there is adequate density and people like the density and it is served by transportation and so on and so forth, to just build there. And that should be a regional solution. Yeah. So, I don't know, it's I think maybe that should be your next bill that you could introduce, that people will talk about at the ballgame is something on those
absolutely.
Issues,
No, I think it's a great point. You actually have a really cool piece on your website for people that want to check it out, mikegatto.com, but on your 10 principles of housing, I think it was in the LA Times or something that I went through. And, I definitely see a lot of your arguments. I mean, they make sense. I think for young people in particular, and I know you've got young kids, I've got kids that are starting to talk about college and talk about, moving into their adult lives, which is, by the way, pretty mind-blowing. But, I really want California to be a place where my kids can afford to live. And I think so many people that I know are having their kids are just moving out of state, right? They either go to college out of state or they finish college and then move out of state, and they just aren't staying in California anymore. I think we're losing a lot of talent because it's just not financially responsible to stay here anymore, and a big part of that is the housing costs. Yeah.
That's a question that I push back on when you're talking with somebody who is like one of these. Yeah. Look, I love California. We're both California patriots, right? We love it. It's so stipulated. But the people who talk blindly like we have no problems, I don't think is solving the problem. And whenever I encounter something like that, I challenge them and I say, okay, I want you to pretend that you have a first cousin who grew up in Kansas. Yeah. And they went to school in the middle of the country, Kansas, right? And they don't have relatives in New York or California or Texas. They don't have relatives anywhere. You have to, someone's holding a gun to your head and saying, you have to tell them a city to move to, go. You're not going to tell them. You're not going to tell them Los Angeles right now. You're just not. Yeah. You're not. Let's be honest. Let's be real. You're going to suggest something else. It could be Austin. Who knows? But it could be South Carolina. But you're not going to tell them Los Angeles or San Francisco. Be real. And sometimes you get pushback on that. But I think that's real.
No, I do. I think you need to acknowledge, right? Because you can't really solve those problems if you don't agree that they exist. Yeah. And I think that is a challenge in a lot of our big cities right now. I think your points on homelessness too are critical because this truly is a mental health and in a lot of cases substance abuse crisis that we have in our state. We can't just keep throwing money sort of down the same well and expect a different result. And I think the problem in California has not been investment. We have invested a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars in California, and we continue to see, our numbers go up every year. And I think it's definitely time for a new approach on that as well.
For sure.
Not to bring up old articles that you've written, because I know some of these are really old, but one of my favorite ones that I read on your site was your life without a car. So I was going to ask you, do you still kind of make it work? I think, and you can summarize it if you want for people, but basically you kind of went without a car for a long time to see what it would be like. Are you still living that life, or what's your experience been lately with that?
So I try to practice what I preach, and as part of a political party that was talking about getting people out of cars, I thought, you know what? I have the power to do this. I was living at that time in a very walkable neighborhood in Glendale, and I could walk to the grocery store. I could walk to literally anything I wanted. On top of that, if I attended events and stuff like that, I often carpooled, so it was like, all right. And then when I left the legislature, I was living in a neighborhood of Hollywood, or the Hollywood Hills, that was literally walking distance to a subway that could get me to downtown in 11 minutes door to door. And so I said that and by the way, right around the time that I was taking this bet that I think me and my friends had something to drink, they're like, oh, okay, you want to push for all these things? Like, all right, you live, So right around that time, there was a very prominent Senate pro tem who had put forth this bill on clean energy and reducing gasoline use. Yeah. And at the bill signing, you got to read these headlines if you haven't. At the bill signing, his staff pulled up with 2 black SUVs and left them idling for 3 hours, right? And it was like, right, and it was like the hypocrisy, right? Like the hypocrisy, right? Like, and so anyway, I lived 9 years without a car in Los Angeles. I finally broke down and got a car during the pandemic because my wife was like, you can't, be in close proximity with like an Uber driver or the subway with all this stuff going on.
Good
right?
point.
And I was like,
I think that actually hurt. COVID really hurt RT.
It did.
Regional transit for that reason, because whether it was the masking or just the proximity, it was a problem. Yeah.
And by the way, I will say that when I tell my fellow Democrats, I say, homelessness is a huge environmental problem. They go, what are you talking about? I go, well, in Los Angeles now, you have people, not just people who are frail and weak, but even like strong, robust people who will not ride public transit because, a guy is swinging a machete or a guy crapped on the seat. And if you're wearing a suit, and so you have people not willing to use public transit because of the homeless problem. So,
well, and I've told a lot of my colleagues this. I rode transit for 10 years in Sacramento. I had a very similar situation where I was lucky enough I actually did ultimately drive to the transit stop, because Sacramento is a little different than LA in some ways. Sure. And actually, that's the interesting thing about living in different communities, right? And sort of why I sort of harp on one-size-fits-all policies, because when I lived in LA, my wife and I had one car. I rode the bus everywhere. I don't know if I barely drove my car when I was in LA, to be honest with you. I walked a lot, rode my bike a lot. It was actually very doable. It's not quite the same in the Sacramento region. It's a lot more spread out, and it's a little more challenging to do that. And so, but I rode transit for 10 years in Sacramento. And I always told my colleagues this, it's like, I'm not anti-transit, even though I don't vote for every transit bill all the time. I think if you want people to ride transit, you have to make it, you have to make it clean. You have to make it so people want to ride it.
Of course.
And I think if you're not enforcing fares, if you're not, keeping it clean, if you're not providing a good service, people are going to avoid it. And I think that's a problem we definitely need to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so I just really appreciate you coming on, Mike, and really appreciate your perspective. I guess to close here, I'll just kick it to you. If there's any final thoughts that you want to leave us with, maybe even in your final thought, throw in maybe what is some advice you would give. I won't say to me, but you can give me advice too, to a new legislator. We have, as you know, we have sort of a huge new crop of legislators, right? Probably some of the biggest turnover we've seen in a long time over the last 3 cycles, and some of that's really good, right? It's good to get some fresh perspectives and some fresh ideas in the legislature, but we've also lost quite a bit of institutional knowledge from some of our colleagues that sort of had that. So what is some of the advice you might give to some of these new crop of legislators or even lobbyists, right, as we close things out here?
Well, the advice that I would give to a new legislator, and you could argue that this might be tailored to members of my party, but I'll tailor it to everybody out there, and that is don't let yourself be taken for granted. And what I mean by it is there's a headline every year about 2 or 3 members of the legislature, usually Democrats, frankly, who didn't vote no on a single bill despite 2,500 or 3,000 votes. Yep. Sometimes for Republicans, it's that they rarely vote yes on bills that are in dispute. Naming a highway is one thing, but for like substantive bills,
sure,
they very
sure.
rarely vote yes. And when you do that, when you take that approach, first of all, you're signaling that you're lazy. You're signaling that you're not reading the legislation.
Yeah.
The idea that 2,512 ideas came before you and you did not have an issue with any one of them, that they were all good, is so hard to believe. So
it's hard. Yeah, it's impossible.
Secondly, you're telling everybody out there, whether it's your 500,000 constituents or the lobbyists or special interests or anybody who cares about a bill, you don't need to talk to so-and-so because he or she is always going to vote yes or always going to vote no. Yeah. And the third thing that you are doing essentially is you are handing your vote card to a label. What you're doing is you're telling people that if a bill is authored by this party, it's going to be an automatic yes or no for you. And I mean, you're nodding because I know you are such a refreshing breath of fresh air. You are so common sense. You work with both parties. You've got a great reputation. But and probably people who are watching are nodding like, wait, there's people who do this. But in Sacramento, like this is a thing. And to me, that just blows me away because it's like, why would anybody talk to legislators who are like that? I don't understand it. You have basically taken yourself out of the running for everything. And it's just really not the right thing to do. So that's my biggest piece of advice.
I think that's great advice. We actually have a legislator that, and again, won't name names, but that will not vote for a Republican bill. Doesn't matter what the content is. Doesn't matter what the topic is. If it's not opposable, that individual will simply abstain from the bill. But it makes. I just think it really does sort of go against why we're here, right? I mean, obviously we're going to have debates and we're going to have disagreements, but ultimately we're here to do the work of the people of California, and there's going to be things that you're going to disagree with your own party on, and then there's going to be things you're going to agree with the other party on, and that's how it's really designed to work. So
that's
yeah, it's really
being a thinking human.
Really, exactly. Well, and you were kind of
shocking.
You were kind of like known too, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. You didn't love to abstain on bills, right? Like you like to go yes or no. Yeah. I mean, what was your sort of philosophy on that?
My philosophy on that was that the public pays us to really do a job, right? They pay us for 3 jobs, right? To introduce legislation to improve things, to vote on legislation, and to do constituent service.
100%.
And it's like, how bad does it look when I can't be troubled to vote? They don't know if you're in the room. They don't know if you're down the hall. They don't know if you're using the restroom, or they don't know if you're just lazy. And I said that I wanted to be on the record for everything, so that's what I did.
That's fascinating. I think that's something that's very rare.
I know.
But yeah, no, that's incredible. Well, Mike, any other final thoughts before we let you go?
Just thank you, Josh. I think this is fantastic that you do a podcast, and look forward to talking to you again. Absolutely, Mike. Thanks again for coming on. Definitely check out the WTF podcast that Mike and David Quintana do. You can also check out more about Mike at mikegatto.com. And what's your X? Do you have an X, or what's the best way to follow you on socials? X is at Mike Gatto. At Mike Gatto. Super nice easy. If I do have to drop a quick plug here. My wife is actually going to be coming on an episode of the Point of Order podcast later in the year, so we're gonna have a very fun. I'm actually very nervous about it. You should be. But for people that would like to, she has asked me to promote that we are accepting questions. If anyone wants to ask her questions about me, or her question, or us questions about how we deal with this whole political thing, you can send those to pointoforderpod@gmail.com, or you can actually reply. We have a pinned tweet on our X account at pointoforderpod, where you can
reply with your questions. As always, you can follow us on socials at Point of Order Pod and myself at Joshua_Hoover on X. Mike, thanks again for coming. I really appreciate you, and best of luck with all your future endeavors.
Likewise.
See you later.